Brandon Chase, great to meet you, man. I'm really excited to talk with you. I feel like we've got a lot in common. You're an ultra marathoner, a father, a registered Maine guide, a bit of an adventurer, and you're living here in the great state of Maine. And I can't wait to hear about some of your exploits and talk guiding with you, which is kind of new for me. And it seems like you've got a lot more experience, certainly in Maine. So I'm excited to learn a little bit from you and hear some of your stories about guiding. But to start it off, tell me what's really lighting your fire right now, man. What's getting you stoked about life? What's getting you out of bed?
Oh man, so many things. Since we moved back to Maine in 2020, I've just been sort of concentrating on whatever I'm passionate about at the time. And so when we came back, it was all about being outside and how I could be outside more. And that's how I got into guiding. That's how I got into like writing for outdoor outlets and doing gear reviews and things like that. Basically doing everything I could to spend more time outside. And so I'm still kind of riding that high and trying to be outside as much as possible.
So you came back to Maine. Where did you go to? And are you from Maine originally?
Yeah, yeah. So I grew up here on Mount Desert Island. Went to high school here, and then went to college at the University of Maine, and stayed through. Got my bachelor's in electrical engineering, got my MBA, and then couldn't wait to get out of the area. I wanted to escape Maine as
Yeah.
quick as possible.
Yeah.
My excuse at the time was, oh, there's no jobs here, right? Um, and I just wanted to do something else, see another part of the country. And so I ended up moving down to DC. I worked for a defense contractor down there for a couple of years, working on like systems controls and weapon systems. We had a big contract for the Navy, so was working for them for a while, and that was interesting, but it wasn't really quite doing it for me. And so I ended up applying to the Department of State. They had jobs
Mm.
for security engineers and technology professionals. So I applied, took me a couple interviews, but I eventually got in and they sent me overseas. So I spent 7.5 years overseas being posted at
Wow.
various US embassies. I was
Hmm.
in Cairo, Egypt for about 2 years, and then over to Nicosia, Cyprus. And then my final post was in Islamabad, Pakistan. And
Wow.
yeah, so while I was
Working
overseas,
for
that's where, okay.
working for Uncle Sam.
Yeah,
So that's a government position. I'm totally naive to foreign service. It's not military. It's
right.
private contracting or like who pays your check kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's the U.S. government. It's Uncle
Yeah.
Sam for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's the Department of State which handles foreign policy essentially. But
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
do the embassies overseas do essentially everything in house. So there's
Hmm.
two tracks you can be on. There's a foreign service officer and a foreign service specialist. So for
Hmm.
people who are not familiar with it, it's kind of like the foreign service officer job is what you think of when you hear of a diplomat. It's the people going to
Hmm.
parties and wearing the fancy suits and schmoozing and doing that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how they're portrayed anyway. Um, and
Oh,
then
interesting. Yeah.
the specialists are the ones who are doing kind of the behind the scenes work, and it's the stuff that
Hmm.
makes the embassy run day to day. So that's construction
Hmm.
engineers, it's IT professionals. There's a whole slew of different specialist jobs, security. And so I was on the specialist side. And essentially, the way the hiring works is if you're coming in to be an officer, a generalist, then you're hired based on your potential to do the job. If they think you're going to
Hmm.
represent the U.S. well, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas a specialist, you come in with a set of skills already. So they're hiring you to do a particular job that you've already
Hmm.
proven you can.
Hmm.
So that's what I
Hmm.
did. I joined as an information management specialist, which they now changed the name to be a diplomatic telecommunications officer or something like that. It's essentially IT. But again, they do everything in house. So IT is a very broad term. So it was anything from computers to satellites to radios, telephones, everything that plugged in or emitted a signal was under our purview.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
Yeah.
was
A lot
pretty.
of IT. Hmm.
Yep, yep, and it was fun. I enjoyed it for a while, but at
Hmm.
a certain point, that drive to just be outside and to do more started to that voice started to get louder and louder, and I kind of
Oh,
got
I'm
tired
sure.
of
Yeah. A
working
couple
in
years in
windowless offices.
Cairo.
Yeah,
A couple years in Cairo will do that to you. Hot, a lot of time indoors, probably. I'm sure you're not, walking around the pyramids and taking pictures. You're indoors with AC. on a
Yeah.
screen getting work done. Far cry from growing up on the island life of Mount Desert Island. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
about that. I love that area. I've never met anyone that grew up there
Mm.
before. I think of it as, just this Disneyland of like, adventure and beauty and majesty. And I've got a friend who's got some family that has a property there, and I kind of go visit once in a while in the summertime, but don't know much about it.
Yeah, and it's all those things. When I was growing up here, so my mother owned a shop in town. I grew up in Northeast Harbor, which is the
Hmm.
next town over from Bar Harbor for anybody that doesn't know exactly where that is. And she had a shop there that she had open in the summer, and she sold.
Hmm.
When she started out, she went to fashion design school and started making clothing, and that's what she originally sold. And then it turned into other things that she had made because she was pretty creative, and
Hmm.
very skilled at sewing and crafting. And then it became more of her going to craft shows and buying things that other people in Maine had made, and then also selling her
Hmm.
own things. And
Hmm.
she also made these bracelets that became pretty popular among summer families that she would make on you, dyeing different colored ropes and things.
Hmm.
And so and my father owned his own business in Ellsworth, just about 30 minutes away from here, just off the island. He was a graphic
Hmm.
designer. So both my parents owned their own businesses. So it was sort of a non-traditional upbringing in that sense, where they were both very busy doing their own things, but they never really had their
Yeah.
own bosses either.
Yeah. No
Which
9 to 5. Hmm.
yeah, which was really attractive to me later in life. But growing up here, I just got real sick of it as a teenager, like anybody does at any place they grow up. I just thought, oh, it's cold, everything shuts down in the winter. There's nothing to do. This place sucks. I can't wait to get out of here. And it wasn't
Hmm.
until I'd spent a significant amount of time away where I started to
Yep.
realize that's actually a pretty special place. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
only national park in New England, right at our doorstep. I mean, literally right in my backyard is a
Yeah.
is a sign for the border. So I can walk right out my door here
Hmm.
and be on the trails in,
Hmm.
2 minutes. So that's
Oh
something
man.
that's really powerful and valuable for me. And
I
yeah,
can
so now looking
totally
back,
relate.
it was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I had such a unique place and such an awesome upbringing in this kind of area. But, lost on me as a teenager.
Yeah. Classic. I don't know if it's hindsight or growth as a man or a human, that you don't know really what you have until you kind of get older. And I can totally relate growing up in Maine myself and thinking similarly, like this place kind of sucks. Like there's not a lot going on here. A lot of rednecks, like not a lot of opportunity. The weather kind of sucks. And like, yeah, there's the ocean and there's the mountains, but the mountains are small. And I just wanted so much more. And I've always wanted a life of adventure. I started rock climbing in high school, and that brought me out west like right away. I moved out west at 17, and for 2 decades I said, I'll never move back to Maine. Maine sucks. The weather sucks.
Yes.
The people sucks. There's nothing for me there. But then I came back and started to kind of engage in some of the, outdoor adventure opportunities that do exist here. And I realized, you know what? Actually, there's a lot more here than I gave it credit for. And there are little pockets of people and communities, and the opportunities do exist in a certain way if you're willing to scratch the surface a little bit. I think it's a different era too. Things are certainly more of a recession, I would say, maybe in the 90s in the state of Maine's economy.
Yeah.
Anyway, but you said you did 7 years abroad in the foreign service and then decided to come back. And you had told me that you took a big risk at one point to come back. And I'm curious to hear that story because I love taking risks myself. It's a big part of adventure. And so I'm excited to hear what brought you back and why you took that risk.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's a big risk to leave a career that, I had tenure in the foreign service, so I essentially had a job for as long as I wanted it. They give a pretty good pension still, so if I'd stayed in 20 years, you get a pretty significant pension, excellent healthcare that's not quite free, but essentially free for life for as long as you stay in 20 years. And so that's the big draw. That's the golden handcuffs that a
Hmm.
lot of people stay in for. What I was
Hmm.
noticing though was that I had started to work with and meet with a lot of people who were way past their enjoyment of the job, but were just gutting it out to get those
Hmm.
benefits. And
Hmm.
they were miserable themselves. They were making everybody around them miserable, and they just weren't being effective or fun to be around. And they were really just tarnishing, the whole attitude of the of the whole job. And
Yeah.
so pretty early on, I think I realized like this is a good job. I'm glad for the opportunities, and this is really educational, but it's probably not what I'm going to do forever. And so then it became, okay, well, how long do I want to stay in? What's an exit strategy? No matter how you slice it, it's a risk, right? Because you're leaving something that's certain and going to something possibly I didn't even know at the time when I first started thinking about it that is
Hmm.
uncertain and that doesn't have those benefits and those privileges. And
Yeah.
so, and especially in a job like that, it sort of becomes all consuming because you're living in this bubble overseas, especially in places
Hmm.
like Pakistan, where it's considered a war zone.
Yeah.
And you have limited amount of movement you can do. So you're stuck on a compound for most of the time. So I was based in Islamabad, but I spent a significant portion of my time in Peshawar, which is on the border of Afghanistan. And that was on a quarter acre compound, 30-foot
Mm.
walls with barbed wire. You weren't allowed to leave the
Well,
compound unless you had an armed security convoy that you were riding in, with armed guards and a helmet and flak jacket and all that. So I would go
wow.
down there for months at a time, and you're sleeping in an armed shipping container as well. So and your office is 20 feet away from where you live, and the cafeteria is 20
Yeah.
feet that way. So your
Yeah.
world becomes very small. Um,
Hmm.
but you're surrounded by a lot of people who are also in that, and so
Hmm.
your community becomes very small, and everybody's sort of in this fishbowl where everybody knows
Hmm.
everybody's business. It's just a different world, and that becomes your identity the longer you do it. And so people have a really hard time leaving any secure job, but especially ones like that where you're like, this is all I've ever done. This is all I know. It's a particular skill set that doesn't always translate very well to the private sector, and so people get very nervous about leaving that kind of
Hmm.
lifestyle. And
Hmm.
I was too. But there were several things that sort of led me to that direction, and what made me make the final decision. One of which is that I've been reading and sort of thinking about this philosophy of financial independence for a long time. I'm not sure if you're
Hmm.
familiar with that, but this whole
Sure.
concept of you know saving like a madman, investing as much of your income as you can so that you can withdraw that at a later date. You can retire early, possibly,
Hmm.
and you can have
Hmm.
some runway to be able to figure out what your passion is and what you actually want to spend your time doing instead of
Hmm.
just being on the hamster wheel, chasing the money, and just
Yeah.
always doing that
Yeah.
one thing
Yeah.
to make ends meet. So as soon as I got overseas, that's when I really kicked that into high gear. I started saving a lot because also one of the other benefits about being overseas is that you get free housing, so your
Yeah.
expenses can be extremely low as long
Hmm.
as you're not blowing it all on $20,000 vacations and things like that. Um, so there was a clear path to say, hey, I can put a lot of money away, invest it, and then withdraw that at a later date, and have some runway to figure out what I want to do. So that was the first thing that I did. It was like, yeah, this
Stage
is setting me
one.
up to where I want to be. Yep.
Yeah.
Um,
Stage one. Burst the bubble. Pop that tiny little pod echo chamber.
exactly.
Don't do it, man. The golden hit. You're gonna make it. Yeah. Right.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Challenging.
Yeah, for sure. And and once we did decide to leave, I'm jumping forward a little bit here, but we met a lot of resistance. A lot of our friends and colleagues, once we started telling people that we were leaving, would come up and say, what are you doing? Like, how could you, what's the plan? What are you thinking? Like, why would you do this? You're already
Yeah.
in. It takes a
Yeah.
long time to get into this job and interview and et cetera, et cetera. Like, why would you give all this up?
Hmm.
And so, you know, depending on who the person was would dictate how we answered that question. But sometimes it was just, oh, we want to do something else. Sometimes we'd go into more depth.
Yeah.
But then, so that's what I was thinking of a couple years out. In 2019, my mother passed away from throat cancer, and it was a very, very quick. She just one day in April woke up and had a lump on her neck, went to get it checked out, and she had stage 4 cancer. So she
Wow.
passed away 2 months later. And
Wow.
so that was sort of a wake up call because I was in Pakistan at the time and I wasn't able to make it back before she passed. And
Yeah.
so,
In order to see her again. Tragic.
yeah, yeah. And so that was one thing of like, okay, I not only have I missed just about every friends and family's wedding and,
Hmm.
birthdays and things like that. You miss all the special events
Hmm.
overseas, but I also missed a
Hmm.
very major one.
Hmm.
And so that was sort of strike two of me thinking, okay, it's probably time to start thinking about making an exit sooner rather than later. And then
Hmm.
the third big one was that right about that same time, or very soon thereafter, my father's cognitive decline picked up rapidly. So he has Alzheimer's dementia in his family. His mother passed away
Hmm.
from it about
Hmm.
5 years earlier than that. And
Hmm.
so all of a sudden it was like a switch went off, and his decline started to increase rapidly. Um,
Hmm.
and so that was really the final straw of saying, okay, I didn't take care of my grandmother. We had some cousins and stuff that were helping her out. Um, but I knew that my dad was going to need a lot of help in the next few
Yeah.
years, and I could be in a position to assist with that if I were back in Maine, if I, had the
Yeah.
freedom and the flexibility to be available for things like that.
Hmm.
And so that was
You
really
want to
the,
make yourself present. Hmm.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And part of it was also like, yeah, I didn't get to spend the last few months of my mother's life with her, and so I wanted to try to do what I could to be around for the last part of my father's. And so, he's doing well. He's now in assisted living, and I still see him
Yeah.
a lot and take care
Oh,
of a lot
great.
of things for him. So
Yeah.
he's steady. But I wouldn't have been able to do any of that if I was overseas still, because he
Of
needed in
course.
the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it wasn't an emergency until about 2 years ago, and that's when things
Hmm.
really started to
Hmm.
change. But I was in
Hmm.
place. I had the time and the resources to do
Yeah.
those things for him. Those I was set that.
Yeah.
So that's really those. That's a long story, but those were
No,
the
it's
things
good.
that set up
It's
this
good to have the
transition.
depth. I get it. Yeah. The
Yeah,
leap of faith, so to speak. It's brave of you. Honestly, it's a big adventure, a big risk. I love the golden handcuffs. And I think that, having something so deeply entwined into your personal, emotional, financial well-being. It's like likened to the sunken cost fallacy of business. You've got so much
yep,
invested into it that you can't walk away from it. You don't want to give up on the thing. And of course, it kind of pulls on the ego a little bit too. You feel like you've given up and you didn't make it, and thinking
yeah,
about yourself as whether I'm successful or not if I did this. And of course, the self representation, your avatar self in the world, what I want people to think of me. Do they think I'm a failure because I didn't make it and I went for it? But I give you a lot of commendation actually for that. That's huge to put family first. So
mm,
good for you. It's great that you're able to spend time with your father now, and he's in the home. Classic.
yep.
I wonder if your return to Maine also like reinvigorated like the desire for nature in the world, and how that evolved into your now guiding profession, and how those steps evolved for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had never been much of a runner or sort of an outdoors person. And this is going back to when I was a kid. So when I was really little, my mother was writing a children's hiking book for Acadia National Park. And
Cool.
she never ended up publishing it, unfortunately, but she took me and my brother out a lot of hikes when I was maybe 4 to 8 years old. And she'd have a clipboard and she'd make notes. This is before computers had really taken off and no cell phones or anything like that, obviously. So
Yeah.
she would make
Yeah.
notes and bribe us with candy bars to get us to summits and things like that. And so that's what sort of started the outdoors stuff with me, which of course I hated at the time. I didn't want any part of it. It was too hard and too long, and I didn't like it. But then years later, it really just flipped a switch in me. I think when I was overseas, mostly part of it was like I didn't have access to it anymore, so I didn't realize how much I valued it until I didn't have it, right? And
Mm.
so
Hmm.
once I got overseas, and like I said, being stuck in a place like Cairo or in Pakistan, well, in Pakistan there was some nature, but we weren't allowed to go into most of it. And
Yeah.
so just, seeing these mountains from my window and not being able to get out there and do anything was a real
Oh,
struggle.
that would kill
Yeah.
me. That would
Yeah.
kill me. Looking out the window at the mountains and your little quarter acre, prison cell
Yeah.
almost. Ah, that would kill me. Torture,
Yeah,
torture.
yeah, I know. You're looking right at the base of the Himalayas there, and it's
Oh
just
yeah.
and all the local staff are like, "Oh, it's so beautiful. It's just 2 hours north, and you're in like a fairyland." And I was like, "La la la, I can't hear it. Don't tell me that." They would all go hiking on
Yeah.
the weekends, and
Yeah.
um, yeah, so it was awesome. So anyway, to get back to the progression here. So once I got overseas, um, Actually, I had just started dating my wife, girlfriend at the time, and she was training for a half marathon in Jordan. And so at the time, I was like, oh yeah, I can run a little bit. I'd never run anything more than 5 miles or so, but we started training
Wow.
together in Cairo, and so all the craziness of that ensued. Did the training. She went off, ran her race, came back, and she said, well, I kind of like that. I think I'm going to sign up for the Chicago Marathon. And so I said, whoa, marathon. Well, that sounds kind of cool. I've never done one of
Yeah.
those either, but it'd kind of been a goal of something you'd be like, yeah, I think I should run a marathon once in my life, right?
Yeah.
And
You're in your
so,
20s. It's like,
yeah,
whatever. I'm made out of magic and rubber. I can handle anything.
exactly, exactly. And
Marathon, no
so,
big deal.
right, easy. And so, so I ended up signing up for the MDI marathon. That's, starts right here in Bar Harbor. And that was 2014. So we both trained for those races. We took a trip back to the US. We went to Chicago. She ran her race. We came to Maine. I ran my race. And once I did that, I said, great, check that box. Never have to worry about that again. Never have to run another mile. I think I'm done. All
Yeah.
behind me. About 6 months later, we go to Cyprus for our next tour. And our deputy chief of mission, which is like the deputy ambassador at an
Hmm.
embassy, she was a huge trail runner. And she sent out this email one day. There was a local trail race happening a couple of months in advance. And she wrote just an email to us employees there, because it was a pretty small embassy. And she wrote, I just signed up for this 50-mile trail race. Who's going to do it with me? And I just looked at that and said, 50 miles? That is absurd. Like,
Yeah.
how is that even possible? Like, that doesn't even make sense. But,
Hmm.
she's kind of a jokester and a prodder. So she's like, you're going to do this thing,
Hmm.
right? Well, I went on their website and come to find out they also had a 25K race. So I'm like, oh, it's 17 miles.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'll placate her. I'll sign up for the
Yeah.
25K and I'll go out and do
Yeah.
it.
Just
Um,
dip your toe in a little
exactly.
bit. At
Exactly.
that point, were you aware of like ultras and what ultras were? Or was it just
Nope.
totally a new world, completely
Totally
unheard
no.
of?
Totally
Oh,
unheard of.
cool.
Didn't
Cool.
know anything about it. And so I just trained how I trained for the marathon, which is I ran a bunch of miles on the road, you know, carried a
Yeah.
water bottle maybe, but no other nutrition or anything like that. And I
Yeah.
went out to this race and I just got smoked. I mean, I was halfway through, I was dry heaving, I was burning up in the sun, I was cramping because I didn't know anything about
Classic.
nutrition. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
was just,
Yeah.
it was a dumpster fire. But I finally got to the end, and for the first few hours, I'm sure I was like, "What the hell am I thinking? This is the dumbest thing ever."
Yeah.
And then a day or two passes by, and short memories and all that, and I was like, "That was actually really fun and cool." I got to be outside all day. I got to go a lot farther than I ever would have if I was just hiking, and I didn't have
Hmm.
a heavy backpack, just a hydration vest. And there's like 4 or 5 of these races on this tiny Mediterranean island every year. And the community
Hmm.
was really cool. Everybody's like really helpful and nice and accommodating and welcoming. And so I was like, this is actually really fun. I think I would like to do more of this.
Yeah.
So
Got the bug.
that
Got the
I got the
bug.
bug. Yep. And that was almost exactly 10 years ago. And, I'm still doing it now. So that just cascaded into, training and signing up for
Yeah.
50Ks and 50
Yeah.
milers. And I've since done a 100 miler here in New England. And yeah, I'm still training and running to this day. So that's really what
Wow.
pushed me into being outside. Um,
Yeah. Wow.
yeah. And
I
then,
I'm gonna ask you more about the ultras, but I want to back up a little bit. There's a marathon on Mount Desert Island, which is like how many miles is the circumference of Mount Desert Island?
it's
20 or
probably,
something?
no, it's more than that.
Is it
Yeah, it's probably 40 miles if you did
40
the full
miles?
circumference. Yeah,
And so does the marathon just kind of do a loop around the island?
almost. So it starts over in Bar Harbor,
Almost,
and
yeah.
then it traces the outline, goes up and around the Sound, and then ends in Southwest Harbor, which is actually the town I live in now.
Oh, okay, so it's
So
not a loop.
it's
Okay.
not a loop. No, it's point to point.
Oh, interesting.
But you're basically
Interesting.
running along the coast the whole time, and it's really
Yeah.
beautiful. I mean, I'm
My
used to
first
hilly races, but
marathon,
people think it's hilly.
yeah. I mean, it's sea level, so
Yeah.
my first marathon was the Maui marathon, and I trained okay. I was in decent shape. I wasn't really much of a runner, but I was always kind of into like endurance sports. I was very fit for rock climbing, which is like a very lean kind of physicality. anyway, and I started training, and I kind of overtrained, and I didn't know much about it at the time, and I just pushed myself and went out and did a bunch of really hard runs. I did a 28-mile run in the training that was way harder than the marathon, and I had a buddy, we went from my house and I measured it with my car. I drove 28 miles and I stopped at 14 and left like a liter of water, and then left my car at the 28-mile mark. Maui's really interesting because it sits in the trade winds in the Pacific, and one side directly faces the wind, and then one side is kind of like in the wind shadow where there's no wind. And so I started in that wind shadow and kind of wrapped around the island. And I remember it was at mile 18, maybe 20, and I kind of like came around this corner, and then all of a sudden, boom, like 15 miles an hour in the face, 80 degrees. It was probably noon. Same thing. I was
Yeah.
struggling so hard, like Charlie horsing, limping into the car at the end. And then I ran the marathon like 2 weeks later or something. It was just so absurd.
Oh
The
my
marathon
goodness.
itself wasn't that bad. It was like easy in comparison to all of
Yeah.
that. But gosh, it was a lot of fun. And so now you
Yeah.
continue to train. Tell me more about some of the ultras you've done. You've done the New England 100.
Yep. Yep. So there's a race in Massachusetts called the Mid-State Massive, and it actually starts right at the border, and you traverse the entire length of the state, and it ends in Rhode
Wow.
Island. So it's
So
along the
north to
Mid-State
south.
Trail. Yep, north to south.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is
I did
that an
it
open
twice.
entry? You got to qualify for that?
No qualify. No, no. Well, the qualification is just, I believe that you need to have run a 50 miler within the last year or
Okay.
two, just
Yeah.
so they're,
Hmm.
just so they know you're up for it essentially, and you know what you're getting yourself into in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But there's aid
Throw some
stations along the
stats
way.
at me. How many 50s, how many hundreds have you done?
So I've only done the 100 miler. I attempted
Yep.
it twice. First time I missed a time cutoff and I had to stop at
Oh,
about
really?
the 62
Oh,
mile mark.
heartbreaker.
Yeah,
Wow. What's
yeah, that
that
was
like?
rough.
You got halfway and they cut you off? How does that work?
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of these longer races, they'll have cutoffs at certain points because obviously they
Right.
want to move people along, right? It becomes a security issue if,
Yeah,
a
of course.
safety risk if people are straggling
Yeah.
way behind and they don't know where people are, especially in a
Yeah.
point-to-point race where you've got
Yep.
100 miles to deal with. A lot of races are loops, or
Hmm.
they're in a much more contained area. Anyway,
Hmm.
so I think this was maybe only the second year they had offered this race. And
Hmm.
what they had was an overall cutoff time for the entire 100-mile race, which was 35 hours or something. But then, and this was my own naivete, is that's what I was paying attention to. I said, I've got plenty of time, 35 hours, I can do that. What I didn't realize is that they also had individual cutoff times for the aid stations, which were not necessarily in perfect alignment with the overall cutoff time. So, for example, the
Okay.
cutoff time for the halfway mark at the 50 mile point was less time than half of the race, right? So if the race is 36 hours, we'll say to be easy, the
Right.
cutoff time for the 50 mile was like 14 hours instead of being 18
Oh,
hours,
less
like it
than
would have.
half. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So that's ended. That's what screwed me in the end.
Hmm.
I was going along. I was at maybe, you know, about the 100K mark, and I
Hmm.
came upon this guy who was walking along the trail. And this was the middle of the night at this point, so we have headlamps on. I come up on this guy. It's not uncommon for people to walk. I mean, especially in 100, it's
Yeah.
mostly power hiking and walking. Like there's very
Hmm.
little running actually taking place. And so I came
Hmm.
upon this guy and just struck up a conversation just to, help both of our moods and spirits. I said, "Hey man, how you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm good. I'm just, I'm not going to make the next cutoff, so I'm just going to enjoy the last little bit I have out here." And I was like, "What do you mean? We've got like another 14 hours. Like we got plenty of time." He said, "Oh,
Yeah.
no, for the next aid station, we have to be there in an hour. That's
Oh.
the cutoff of the aid station." And I said, "Oh shit."
Oh.
And so I looked at, and I had another like 3 miles to go. And at this point,
Oh.
being 60 miles in, I was
Yeah.
not
You're not
super
about to start
fast.
sprinting. Yeah.
Yes. So I turned on the burners as much as I could at that point, and I did make it to that aid station within the cutoff, like just a couple minutes before. And they said,
Oh.
"Okay, now you have 1 hour to get to the next aid station, and that one's 5 miles away." And I was like, "Well, that's just not going to happen."
Yeah.
So I went
Yeah.
for it anyway, and I got to the next
Yeah.
aid station, but it was like half an hour after they were slows down.
Yeah. You
And
couldn't make
so
the 9-minute miles or whatever it required at that point.
nope.
Wow.
Turns out I didn't
Wow.
have it. So
So same
yeah.
race 2 years in a row. You went right back the next year.
Yep. Went right back the
Awesome.
next year. And
Yep.
I don't know, I didn't complain about the cutoff times or anything, but I think they got some
Right.
feedback to that effect. And so
Yeah.
the cutoff times were way different the next year, and they were more in line with the overall cutoff for the race. I
Yeah.
was faster anyway because I knew more about the course and my training and nutrition and everything. So I would have been within the cutoffs, the original cutoffs, that year. But I just had a better race and did better and was able to complete it this time.
And so how long did it take you? 36 hours?
No, I managed a fast 31 hours.
All right. 31. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
And do you stop at all at the aid stations? Do you stop moving?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They, at some of the larger, they have different size aid stations. Some are big. It's like a huge buffet. They've got tents. They've got chairs. Some of them will have like massage tables and stuff. I mean, the sky's the limit for these things. And some of them are
Yeah.
just real small. They're out in the middle of nowhere, so people have to bring things
Hmm.
in backpacks and things like that. So
Right,
it's just
right.
a little table set up, and maybe they've got some snacks. But the larger ones, yeah, they really go all out. And they'll have like quesadillas and soups and full on meals that you can have there. And you can
Oh,
all
I had
have,
no idea. So you get to the
yeah,
aid station and you like hang out, take
yeah,
off your shoes for 10 minutes and like,
yep,
oh,
yep.
wow, wow.
I mean, the really fast people don't, but if you're kind of
Yeah.
in the mid or back of the pack, it's like,
Yeah, of
I know
course. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not winning anything here, so let's just try to get through it and
Yeah, you're
enjoy part
trying
of
to
it.
survive. You're not
Exactly.
going for the gold medal. You're like, I'm trying to make it to the end. Give me a
Yep.
second quesadilla, please.
Absolutely. And you can also
Very
have
cool, man.
a crew and pacers on a lot of
Yep.
these longer races. So like my wife
Yep.
came out and met me a couple times at places that where you could drive a
Hmm.
car, and she'd have
Hmm.
some of my supplies so I could, change my shirt or change out my socks or grab, a certain snack that I like that they weren't going to have at the aid stations. And then my buddy
Hmm.
Andrew came out and paced me for about 30 miles in the middle of that section from like mile 50 to 80, where it's, you're really in the dregs of it because you've already done
Yeah.
50 miles. You have another 50 miles ahead of you. It's the
Yeah.
middle of the
Yeah.
night and you just
Yeah.
can't
Uh-huh.
even comprehend like
Yeah.
how you're going to get that done. And at that point, the longest
Yeah.
I had ever run was a 50 miler. So this is once you get past that 50
Double.
mile point, you're in the abyss. You just have
Yeah.
no idea what it feels like, what's going on. So it really helps to have another person out there.
How great to have your buddy come out and be your like shaman spirit guide slash cheerleader slash
Yeah.
coach, just like rah rah, you got this. I got your favorite flavor Cliff Bar right
Yeah.
here, but also like keep your head in the game, man. You got this, and like every little like woo woo spiritual practice he knows because he knows you so well to get into it.
Totally.
I've always been interested in the ultras, and at one point I thought I would go that route. I had a bunch of pretty severe injuries, broken my back and broken my neck and stuff, and kind of took the long distance running off the table for me. But there's a similar kind of like endurance race that I've always dreamed of. Have you ever heard of the Red Bull X Alps?
No.
And so it's a fusion race, and it's the biggest, maybe not the biggest, but certainly a very well known paragliding competition for hike and fly paragliding. And it goes all the way across the Alps. And so some years
Mm,
the course will start in Salzburg in Austria
mm,
and
hmm.
go all the way through the Alps south, past Chamonix, into like Monaco and finish in the
Wow.
Mediterranean. And the rules are you can either paraglide or hike. And so, the pilots who win the races are like the best pilots, the ones that are able to like capture the best thermals and fly the furthest. But it also takes that same like endurance mentality and the training to be able to get through it because they have to plot their course in a way similar to the aid stations of like where I'm going to land because you can't get any rides. And so everything's on foot. So once you land, you have to hike up to the next launch point, wherever you decide that is, to try and fly the furthest you can across the valley, across the mountain range, whatever it is. And what's cool and what reminded me of it is that in the Red Bull X Alps, you get kind of like a teammate. And what that teammate can do, this one person, is follow you around with the van. And in that van is all your favorite food and snacks and dry
Yeah.
socks, and you can sleep in the van kind of thing, but you can't get a ride anywhere. So it's like you were saying, get these really nice aid stations. You got somebody there, this guy's giving you like weather briefings and that kind of stuff. I
Yeah.
love adventure racing and like pushing people to that human limit and being able to push yourself to that limit too. I think that's really cool. Long distance stuff always fascinates me. I think that, you know, competitiveness and humans as a species are going to always continue to push those limits, So it'd be interesting, like, what's the world record for longest distance nonstop running or something like that? And like that record, you have to imagine, is going to continue to get pushed. That envelope is going to keep going. I think that's a
Yeah.
really cool thing to be a part of. Stokes Picks are the world's first organically flavored nicotine toothpicks, produced in the great state of Maine from American white birch wood, which is sustainably harvested and grown in the great state of Maine. They have incredible flavors: vanilla mint, lemon ginger, cinnamon clove, and absinthe. And if you enter the promo code Enter the Unknown, you'll receive 20% off your order at stokespicks.com.
Definitely.
I myself love like the deep nature wilderness experience. And you've done the Appalachian Trail, which is
Yep.
something I've never done. And I think that similarly is like a great solo endurance, takes a little bit of masochism to kind of push through that. And, for me with nature, I always come back to this phrase, perhaps you've heard, is Shinrin Yoku. It's Japanese. Kind of loosely translates as like forest bathing. But what it means is that like time spent in nature is like preventative medicine. It's good for you in a way that perhaps isn't tangible or can't be quantified by science necessarily, right? That like the
Mhm.
deep immersion in nature is really good for you. And
Yeah.
so, having done the Appalachian Trail, I'd love to hear a little bit about that and your experience on the trail. You did it solo, right?
Yep. Yep. Did it
Yeah.
solo. So, yeah, so that was another opportunity I took advantage of as part of my exit from the Foreign Service as well. Um, essentially, to give you a little backup explanation here. So the way that Foreign Service assignments work is that they're all on a cycle. So in some locations, you're on a 2 year job assignment. Sometimes it's 3 years. You can extend, you can curtail. There's all kinds of different things, but they're all cyclical. And so the way it worked is that I was still technically considered an entry level officer. So my tour was only 2 years long in Cyprus, where my wife's was 3 years long. And so we didn't quite sync up. She had gotten there about 6 months before I did. And so when my 2 years was up, she still had another 6 months at post. So I had this gap, and we both had jobs in Islamabad for later in the fall. So I essentially had the 6 month period that I needed to fill. And I could have gotten a job back in DC doing something, wandering the halls, as they say at Maine State. But instead, I thought, well, this would be the time to do something, outside, something that, obviously growing up in Maine, you hear about the Appalachian Trail and about the northern terminus being on Katahdin and things like that. And I'd been running for a couple of years, and I'd also started following this guy, Joe Stringbean McConaughey, who I don't know if you heard about him, but he had just the year before in 2017 set the fastest known time on the Appalachian Trail,
Hmm.
53
Hmm.
days. So he was, cruising. So that was fresh in my mind. Um, and that's another story, but we became very good friends, and we still are friends to this day. Anyway, so that got me really interested in, oh, like this could actually work. So I was able to take a leave of absence during that 6 month period and string together some leave without pay, some vacation time, all these things to try to get that time filled.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I left Cyprus, flew directly to Atlanta, and started hiking the Appalachian Trail northbound the next morning. And
Wow.
and yeah, and I had set this goal for myself because I'd been running ultras for a couple of years at that point, and I thought, well, 100 days sounds like a kind of a reasonable, like, flat, round number, right? Some
Yeah.
people take the average is 4 months or so, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. But I said, I bet I could do it in about 100 days. That's averaging about 22 miles a day without taking any zeros or things like that. And I
Wow.
was like, yeah, that seems reasonable.
That's
And so,
ambitious.
yeah, but I had been running, I'd run a couple of 50 milers at that point. I'd been training consistently. So I said, yeah, that seems like I could probably do that. Um, it was a bit of a bumpy road, but I actually ended up finishing in 98 days, averaging, 26 to 27 miles a day, even taking 3 or 4 days off along the way. So yeah, it ended up being an awesome experience. And it was about a third of the way on that trail where I just remember walking through this grassy field in the morning. It was kind of dewy. The weather wasn't great. I
Hmm.
had a hard day, the day before, wasn't in the best state of mind, but I just thought to myself, like, this is bliss. I have nothing to do except continue to move forward. I get to be
Yeah.
outside all day, every day.
Hmm.
Everything I need or could want is in my
Hmm.
backpack. And this is
Hmm.
awesome. And it was right then that I decided this is where I need to be. I need to figure out how to do more of this. And so
Yeah.
that, along with the other family health issues is what really, solidified my decision to leave the Foreign Service. And that's also what got me into guiding once I did
Yeah.
leave, because I was like, I need to be outside more. How do I be outside more and get paid for
Right.
it
Right.
possibly?
Yeah. Wow, hardcore, man. So you took your like summer vacation and decided to just plug in the Appalachian Trail. Like, I'll just do 26 miles a day. This is my time off, whatever. I'll
Yeah.
crush it. What a unique experience. I love that like self-supported vision too. And like I can totally empathize with that feeling of like blissed out in nature. What else more could I ask for? What else is there? There's this. I want more of
Mhm.
this. How do I do more of this? How do I get more of this? It's a different kind of endorphin, when you're
Yeah.
running and the blood's pumping and you're in that flow state, right? Where you get into that like cathartic moving meditation, you feel that euphoria, right? And it's like pumping you up.
Yeah.
But when you're either slow hiking or not even moving, but in nature necessarily, and like really kind of communing with the natural world, it gives you a different sense of high, a different sense of like self and connection to the world and like planting your feet on the ground. I love that feeling. I can totally relate to that. And so that, adventure kind of tuned you more into becoming a guide, and you're a registered Maine guide and you do recreation guiding. And I myself just became a guide in the state of Maine. And I'm really excited to do more guiding, learn more about it, interact with more guides like yourself. And tell me a little bit about like how you first got into it and what your experience has been since then.
Yeah. So when we first came back to Maine, and then I started looking at, okay, how can I get into guiding? How can I be outside more? And it happened to be in the spring when I started looking. And right about that time is when a lot of outdoor companies are hiring guides for whitewater rafting. So a lot of these companies will do trainings in May or June to get guides prepared for the season. You do a bunch of trips all throughout the summer, and then a lot of those guides, if they are doing it for multiple years, they'll go work on ski patrol or something in the winter, and then they'll come back, and that's kind
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
guide commute in that way.
Hmm.
So I said, well, this is essentially the lowest barrier to entry to being outside and getting paid for it all the time. So I ended up joining this company called Northeast Whitewater in Shirley, Maine, which is outside of Greenville. And they run trips on the Kennebec River and on the Penobscot River. And then they also do like wildlife safaris, they call them. So you go out in a van or in a canoe and you go look for moose and other wildlife. So it's taking visitors out in nature to see things that they may not have in their own backyards. And so we lived in Greenville for that summer. I was doing a couple whitewater trips a week, a bunch of these moose safaris and nature tours during the week. And what was nice about that is that you got all the training for whitewater
Hmm.
at the company itself, because you can
Hmm.
get your Maine guide's license. You have to have it for whitewater, but you're not allowed to do it on your own. You have to be attached to a company that
Hmm.
is registered
Hmm.
and has service days and all those things.
Hmm. Hmm.
But this company also does a lot of other training. So I was able to get my wilderness first aid certificate through them. And then they also do a registered Maine guides training course, which I think you've done as well. It's like the 3 day
Yep.
weekend thing where they tell you everything you need to know about what's on the test and all those
Yep.
kinds of things for recreation or hunting or whatever. So I took their course on the recreation, becoming a recreation guide, and then was able to take the exam later in the year, and that's what sort of started me on that path. Because after doing a couple seasons of whitewater, I was definitely, and I had always been more interested in the other aspects. Whitewater's fun, and it's a great way to be outside, especially in the summer. And Maine's got some really world-class whitewater rapids and rivers. So it was an awesome experience. But I really wanted to focus more on backpacking and bringing out groups
Mm-hmm.
and people who wanted to go up Katahdin or do these longer types of things. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's part of what had us interested in moving more to the Millinocket area, and that's really
Mm-hmm.
where my other type of guiding started taking off. So,
Mm-hmm.
quick plug for the Millinocket area. I think it's one of the best places in the entire state of Maine, partially because it has some of the lowest real estate prices of anywhere in the state for anywhere that has anything that you'd want to do. So it's got world
Yeah.
class outdoor opportunities with the river, with the mountain, with the park, tons of facilities, and you can still get a house for $100,000. Like
Yeah.
that just doesn't happen anywhere else in the state of Maine. So for anybody
Or
out
in
there
the
who is,
country for that
yeah,
matter,
yeah, exactly.
unless you're in like remote Idaho, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But, and there's maybe other places that you can get a house for cheap, but it's not going to have access to the outdoors like they do there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ended up buying a house there, and we go up there in the summers, and I started working for the New England Outdoor Center, who they're essentially the only resort in the area that does like larger scale guiding trips. There are a bunch of guides that do, sort of their own trips, but nothing as established as the New England Outdoor Center. And so again, it was like, okay, I need to find the quickest path to being outside more in the state of Maine. So
Mm-hmm.
started talking to them, and immediately started doing guided trips up Katahdin. I've done a couple of these wildlife safaris because they do them as well, and then some whitewater rafting for them. And
Mm-hmm.
then sort of
Okay.
as tangentially to that, I also started working for this company. It's just a guy's name, Andrew Skirka Adventures. He's based out of Colorado. And I started guiding for him in 2021. Started working for him in 2020 because to bring the connection home, that guy, Joe McConaughey, who had set the speed record on the Appalachian Trail, we became friends, and he became my running coach for a few years. And he had started working for this guy as his program manager. So running
Mm.
people through an online curriculum of how to backpack essentially, and then taking them out
Mm-hmm.
on these trips and doing it in the
Mm-hmm.
field. And
Mm-hmm.
so he had asked me because they needed help reviewing people's assignments and gear lists and things like that. So he asked me in 2020 if I would help with that. And that's what got me in with that company, and then eventually guiding with them. They don't do
Mm-hmm.
anything in Maine or in New England. They do trips in southern Utah, the High Sierra, Brooks Range in Alaska, and they have done trips in West Virginia in the past. So I sort
Mm-hmm.
of, I'll do some trips in Maine on Katahdin, but I tend to not do many overnight types of things. And then I'll do these trips out west, either in the High Sierra, or Utah, or Alaska with the other company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Katahdin, it's kind of peak bagging, right?
Yeah.
1 day trip, go up, hit the summit, come back down, depending on the skill of your clients. Maybe you do a hard route, maybe you do an easy route.
Yep. Exactly.
Did you do any kind of training for like the naturalist tours? Is that something that you just already had in your repertoire of knowledge? But as far as like flora and fauna identification and being able to kind of schmooze the spiel to the tourists of check out the black-capped chickadee and there's a white pine and there's a red pine, and
Yeah.
did you get any training with that, or is that just kind of come naturally with spending a lot of time out there?
No, I had to train it for sure. You know, I don't necessarily have that gift of gab. I tend to be a little more introverted unless it's something I'm really interested in talking about, like being
Hmm.
outside. So in that
Yeah.
sense, it comes easy for me to talk to people about the outdoors and about Maine. But it's things I had to research and quiz myself on. A
Hmm.
big part of that was learning and studying for the Maine guides exam because they test you on all
Yeah.
that stuff. So you have to know
Yeah.
your flora and your fauna and the
Hmm.
rules and
Hmm.
everything. So that's sort of what started that process of being okay. I do need to be able to identify these things and to explain the habitats
Hmm.
and everything. And so once I learned that, I just tried to stay on top of it and remind
Yep.
myself every year before I go out.
Yeah, keeping the knowledge current, having a couple field guides. Maybe, I was shocked actually at how extensive and difficult the Maine testing was.
Yeah.
For years, I kind of poo pooed Maine, and now I'm a hunting guide. But for years, I poo pooed hunting. I thought
Mhm.
it was, pretty naively something that like rednecks engage in, and people who don't know much about the wilderness or don't appreciate wilderness and are just out there to shoot guns and drive trucks and kill animals.
Yeah.
And I feel kind of sheepish in hindsight that I ever had that like opinion, like looking at hunting and hunters, and especially how the registered Maine guide was something that like fell underneath that umbrella of like can't be that hard. If those guys can do it, it must be pretty easy. And
Hmm.
then I went and took both the hunting and the recreation tests at the same time. And boy, was I blown away at like the difficulty and like finite questioning of like how specific some of them would be, certainly for like the hunting laws and applications. And when I took my test, I went into a state building in Augusta, the state of Maine, and it started with the in-person oral examination. And you kind of get walked into this room, and there's three game wardens sitting there. And my experience was good cop, bad cop, and like orchestrator, and,
Hmm.
and one guy was just drilling me about all these questions and where are you from and you broken any laws, the kind of back up. And then the good cop was like throwing out these scenarios, okay, you're on day 2 of a canoe trip and dad breaks his ankle and falls into the fire. And like, what do you do? That kind
Yeah.
of stuff. And like, you get through the oral examination, which half I think is like a test of character a little
Sure.
bit, as well as knowledge. And
Yeah.
then you get into the written, which I believe was 150 questions per examination. And so
Yeah.
I'd go in for the oral, which is like an hour, and then the back to back written, which is another hour and another hour. I was sweating it because I studied hard for quite a while and I felt
Yeah.
confident I was going to go in and I was going to pass. But it was impressive, kind of shout out to the state of Maine a little bit. I've heard, in fact, that they're trying to up the quality of the guides and like making the testing harder. They were quite concerned with cheating, in fact, because
Hmm.
apparently people have cheated and do cheat.
Hmm.
And I thought, how would you cheat? And so going
Yeah.
into the oral examination, they made me take out my phone and I used it for a couple of their like orienteering tasks and like showing how to use a GPS on my phone and that kind of stuff. But then they made me show that my phone was off. And then they kind of like locked it in a box and put it off to the side because people will record the oral examination and then you can play that back to your friends. And the
Mhm.
bad cop guy was saying, you're not going to take this back to your buddies, right? He's kind of like getting in my face a little bit. He's like, you're not taking this
Right.
information anywhere. You're not sharing it with your friend, you know?
Right.
And then with the written examination, you go, or at least my experience was going into a very small room with a desk, a lamp, a pen, and a window that's got the two-way glass on it.
Hmm.
And after my test, I asked the examiner woman who was kind of helping me with my process, what's up with glass? And she said, oh, you want to look behind it? And she kind of walked me around the room on the other side. And they have a camera filming you the whole time. So it's not someone
Wow.
watching you, but then they can review it, in case you get your
Mhm.
notes written down on your wrist or you're trying to cheat or something like that. And
Yeah.
so I've also heard from living out west for a long time, I lived in Aspen, Colorado about 20 years and in meeting guides out there, that for a time that the main guides were um, almost like looked down upon in a way because there wasn't a really high level of criteria for hunting specifically, and that there are a lot of like old school hunting guides who are grandfathered in, and that
Mm.
like there's a lot of poaching and a lot of just like illegal uncouth behavior that was kind of like low class. And so I
Mm.
understand it now that the state of Maine is like really trying to up the qualifications to get like a much higher level, to like bring the prestige back to it. And
Yeah.
now that I actually tell people I'm a guide, I kind of like get get like excited and I get like a little I don't know, braggadocious almost because oh, you're a guide. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a guide now. I'm a guide.
Yep.
I'm really looking forward to engaging in it in a whole new way because I've done hunting the last couple years and this is gonna be my first year with a foray into the recreation world and looking forward to guiding Mount Katahdin and things like that. And I know it comes with a lot of adventure and the unknown, of course, like the risk of trying new things. And
Yeah.
I think that those adventures they naturally inherently come with like so many good stories. And you told me that you have kind of an epic guiding story from the high Sierras. And without giving too much away, I'd like to hear the full story of the adventure of the high Sierras.
Yeah. Well, so I've got a couple stories. So I have one in the Sierras, which is more of a flow state kind of an element. And then the one in Katahdin is just a good story. And it was a good learning opportunity, I could say, because it was one of my first guiding experiences that didn't go to plan. So which one would you like to hear?
Oh boy. Let's go with the epic first and the lesson second.
Okay. Um, all right. So the Katahdin trip, right? Is that the one we're talking about? Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Sure.
So this was one of my first Katahdin guided trips for New England Outdoor Center. Um, the way it works is people just sort of sign up for a trip. They post them online. You don't, you get a sense of who you're going to be taking, or you know how many people you're taking up before the trip, but you don't have a great sense of their abilities or, their experience. On the intake, they do some of that, but, people also like to inflate their abilities sometimes on these things. So you
Yeah, of
never really
course.
know. You have to take all that stuff with a
Yep.
grain of salt. But I ended
Yep.
up meeting this guy. We, you know, we're heading into the park, and he's retired. He's maybe in his late 60s, early 70s, retired physician. In decent shape, telling me the story about how he's wanted to hike Katahdin for a long time. It's been on his bucket list. He couldn't convince any of his friends to come up with him. He's from Pennsylvania or something like that. And, they're all getting too old and too fat. And so he's like, I got to get this done. So that's why, I hired a guy because I want to be able to get it done and do it safely. I said, yeah, this is great. Our route for the day was to start from Roaring Brook, go up the Huron Taylor Trail, cross the knife
Yep.
edge to Baxter Peak, and down the saddle.
Yep.
That's sort of like
Yep.
the epic loop on Katahdin if you can get it, because you
Yep.
really get the
That's
best
the
of
standard.
everything.
That's the benchmark.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And so that was the plan
No
for the
easy
day.
task. 12
No,
miles round trip.
about that. Yep, about
Yeah.
12 miles. So it's long. It's a long day, but you tend to have you're above tree line for most of the day, which can be good or bad depending on the conditions. And it's just 360-degree views for most of the day, and then you have a relatively easier way on the saddle coming back down. I mean, there's no easy way up Katahdin, but it's the longest trail to get to the peak, so it just divides that elevation gain over a longer distance.
Hmm.
Anyway, so
Hmm.
we're going along, chugging up the Huron Taylor Trail. He's doing pretty well. Um, the New England Outdoor Center has certain cutoff times where if we don't get to a certain point by a certain time, then we really need to consider turning around because it just gets too late in the day. It becomes a safety issue.
Yep.
So we get up
Yep.
to Pomola Peak, which is at the top of the
Yep.
Huron Taylor Trail, just before 11 a.m. And, we're all starting at the same time, about 7 o'clock. So getting up there by 11 is the cutoff time.
Hmm.
And we got up there with enough time, and he was feeling good, still chugging along, no issues, sweating, but, it's a hard hike. So I said, okay, well, once you start on the knife edge, it's kind of the point of no return. You very rarely want to turn around on the knife edge, come back, because it's just not going to be
Yeah.
any faster or any easier. So once you
Yep.
start, you might as well keep going. So we start going across the knife edge, and we go down the chimney up, and we're traversing that long. It's only 1.1 miles, but it feels like
Hmm.
a lot longer when you're on it. And so we're going along, and I can tell that he's starting to slow down a bit. And
Hmm.
so I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
well, it maybe he's got a fear of heights. This is a pretty technical area. Whatever, things happen. But then he starts really slowing down. And
Mm.
so I'm talking to him. I'm trying to gain a sense of what's going on. And he says, yeah, my legs are just kind of shot. He's like, I'm having a hard time, absorbing impact with my quads, and there's a lot of like big sort of jagged step downs and things.
Oh
So
yeah.
that can be a
It's
problem.
up and down, pounding
Yeah,
hike. Yeah.
exactly. So at this point, we're more than halfway across the knife edge. So thankfully, we've got satellite communicators and things where we can communicate. So at that point, I said, okay, well, we're going to have to change our route a bit. So I'm texting back to New England Outdoor Center saying, hey, it's getting really late in the day for where we are. We're going to have to change our route. And instead of going down the saddle, we're going to go down a ball trail. So that way it's more direct, it's shorter, not necessarily
Hmm.
any easier, but it's a shorter and more direct way to get down the mountain. So
Hmm.
they come in,
Hmm.
they move our vehicle from Roaring Brook over to the A-Ball campground and their parking
Hmm.
area there. So we finally make it to Baxter Peak at 4 p.m. So it took us
Okay.
5 hours to go 1.1 miles across the knife edge. That's very, very slow.
Slog. That's
And
crawling.
Yeah, that's crawling. And so I said, "Oh boy, this could be a late night." But he's in good spirits. He's like, "Yeah, my legs are just they're just not working."
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay,
Yeah.
well,
You've made it to the top. You're on your way
yep,
down.
yep." But in that, well, first the first lesson was just because we made it to Pomola Peak before the cutoff doesn't mean that we shouldn't turn around, right? Because there are a lot of things
Yeah.
at play there, and the real
Yep.
task is getting down. Just getting up the mountain and to the peak means nothing if you can't make it back down, right?
Yeah.
So that
They
should
say
have been my
most
first.
climbing mountaineering accidents happen on the way down.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, at that point, what choice do we have? We got to keep going. But, I'm asking, can I take stuff out of your pack? Can I hold this for you? Whatever. He didn't want anything to do with it. He had a lot of pride and, he was chugging along. He said,
Really?
nope, I've
He
got
wouldn't
it.
let you take any weight. Oh,
Yep.
hardcore.
Yeah.
Hardcore.
Yeah. And he was a good dude. I
Stubborn
liked
old
him a
guy.
lot.
That'll be us, Brandon, in our
Oh,
60s and
for
70s.
sure. For sure.
Don't touch my pack,
Yeah.
youngster.
Oh,
Yeah.
I got it. And so, we're chugging along, but we're moving slow. And at this point, we're still on the tablelands. I'm taking one step, counting to three, taking a step, counting to three. I do that for about 10 minutes, and I look back, and he's so far behind me that I can barely see him. That's how
The
slow we're
tablelands
moving.
being that big plateau well above tree line still.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's
Yep.
like a 1 mile area on that big
Mm-hmm.
plateau before you drop down below tree line. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not flat necessarily or easy because none of it's easy, but it's not the big boulder climbing that you have
Yeah.
further on down the trail. And so ostensibly that's where we should be moving the fastest because it's the easiest. But the
Mm-hmm.
fact that we're moving
Mm-hmm.
that slow is troublesome. And so,
Mm.
we're going down, and of course, he's working hard. He's going through a lot of water. And this is in September. So the weather, we actually had a very good weather day and it wasn't too hot, but, just being out there at this point for 12 hours or so, he's
Yeah.
chugged liters and liters of water and he's running out. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving him what I
Mm-hmm.
have left, but I'm running out. And so
Oh
I'm
boy.
thinking, okay, I know there's a spring about a mile ahead that's pretty reliable. I'm going to go down. I'm going to grab his water bottles and mine. I'm going to run ahead. I'm going to fill those bottles, bring it back to him so that he can have something to drink before we get back down to that spring and we can refill again. So I tell him the plan. He says, okay, go for it. So I hustle down to that spring. I get there and it's dry. And I go, oh
Oh no.
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 Yep. And I'm like, we're still at least a couple miles from the trailhead. He's now a mile
Yeah.
behind me. I said, well,
Yep.
I don't have any choice but to keep going. If I have to go all the way down to the trailhead to get water, then that it is what it is. So I start
Yep.
hustling down the trail, and somehow, I don't even know how, there was a little trickle of a spring coming out of the trail about another half mile down. And I was able to just lay on the ground and dip that water bottle just low enough to be able to fill it. So I was able to fill all of our water, pump it back up to him. He was able to drink, use all mine, and then by the time we get back down to that spot, he had drank all his water again, so we were able to refill.
Of
And
course.
so we're
Of
just,
course.
we're
Yep.
just chugging along. He's in a good mood. I'm trying to keep him engaged and keep him talking. And um, thankfully, we were very prepared. So this is another good lesson I learned is that we had enough clothing, we had enough food. We were prepared for the conditions, and the conditions were good enough. It was a nice warm evening, so we didn't have there were no real immediate safety issues other than getting down eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So we finally make it down to A-Ball Campground, go over to the van. He goes to open the passenger side door and he just kind of casually asks me over his shoulder. He's like, "What time is it?" I look at my watch and it is 6:30 in the morning. And so I tell him, I say, it's 6:30. And he just kind of nods and gets in and closes the door. We're driving out of the park and the sun is coming up through the trees.
Oh wow.
And he looks over at me and he goes, "Is it really 6:30 in the morning?" And I said, "Yeah, man." We were out there for
Yeah.
24 hours. And he's like,
Wow.
"I can't believe it. I thought it was maybe 10 p.m." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Nope."
The all night push.
The all night
Wow.
push. Yeah. So we
Good
make
for
it
him.
back. He was staying at New England Outdoor Center, and
Yeah.
I dropped him off at his cabin. And about a day later, I get a text message from a number I don't recognize, and it's a photo of a print of a photo of Katahdin at nighttime, like with a full moon or
Uh-huh.
something. And
Yep.
the message said, "I bought this print apropos of our trip the other day." So it was
Yeah,
him. He had
at
bought
night.
this print.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, at
yeah.
night.
Oh,
And I said,
great.
okay,
Wow.
he's still in good spirits about it. And it then
Yeah,
survived.
he didn't die. He
Didn't
didn't
die.
curse you.
Nope.
Yeah, wow, lesson learned. What a hard thing to judge, right?
Yeah.
And like I've experienced the same, I've taught a lot of skiing, a lot of rock climbing, and people always inflate their abilities, right?
Yeah.
And hunting and how fit they are and what they can handle and without really knowing someone, especially in, that kind of athletic circumstance, really difficult thing to judge like how much gas do they actually have in their tank based on how fast they're
Yeah.
going. They might be looking in the eye and telling you, "Yeah, I feel good. I'm doing good." And then 20 minutes later, they just
Yep.
crash.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
And
you
on
didn't have to
Katahdin,
carry them.
especially. Yeah, I didn't have to
Yeah.
carry him, thankfully. Because on
Yeah.
Katahdin, people think, oh, it's 5,200 feet high. Like, how hard could it
Hmm.
possibly be? There's 14,000
Yeah, it's
footers in the
small. It's
Rockies. Like,
Maine.
whatever. It's like, what they don't understand unless they've been there is that it's essentially a talus field. It's a big rock slide.
Yeah.
So you're just
Yeah.
climbing the whole time. It's never easy.
Yep.
It's never flat. And so, especially if you're coming from sea level, going up a mile is significant. And so that
Oh
really
yeah,
takes
taxing
people.
on, what sounds like a senior as well.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Great
Um,
story. Great story. All right,
yeah.
let's hear the
So,
second.
okay. So the second is more of a flow state kind of a thing. And this was actually just last summer. And it was kind of a culmination of all of my guiding and education coming to a head where I was with this group. We were in Stanislaus National Forest, which is on the eastern, western side of the
Yep.
Sierra. And so we're out
Stanislaus, I've
there.
been there. Yep.
Have you? Yeah, awesome.
Yep.
It reminds me a lot of Maine actually because of how much granite they have out there. It's just these
Hmm.
long, huge granite slabs. Beautiful.
Yep.
And so we were
Evergreen
out there.
forests. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Going back out there this year, I can't wait. And so we were with this group, and it was a 7 day trip. And we had been out. This was probably day 5, maybe day 6, and we had just been hammering navigation into them. We had been off trail for almost the entire trip. We start the trip at a trailhead, but then within a couple of miles, we veer off, and then we're using map and compass to navigate. We're going up over passes. We're looking at the topography and seeing, okay, what looks good? Do you think we can get up and over that? Well, what's on the other side? Is there a lake? Is there somewhere we want to go? Is there good camping? All those things. And so we had gotten to a point where we sort of let the clients take charge, where we,
Mm.
we, we give them all the skills, we build it up, and finally they get to sort of take on a section and they get to lead it. And so
Oh
there was
wow,
this
is
one.
that typical of those trips? You kind of have
Yep.
like a empowering autonomy, or okay, like here's the
Yeah.
reins. Cool.
Yeah, yeah. And so this was one of those particular sections. It's not like the whole day or anything. It's like, okay, we need to get down this pass or we need to get over here based on what we said on our map. Okay, you two up front, you lead us there. And
Hmm.
we'll have a guy close by to say, this, danger over there. Let's
Yeah, yeah.
focus our efforts on this path over here. And so we were coming down this giant pass that was probably, I don't know, 10,000 feet. And we needed to drop about 2,000 feet down to a lake.
Hmm.
And if you're just
Hmm.
standing on the top of the pass, to the untrained eye, it just looks impossible. Like it doesn't look like there's any way down except for maybe one of your paragliders. Like it's just,
It's just cliff drops
yeah,
everywhere.
it just looks impossible. But these guys have been looking at the maps. They've been studying everything very closely for almost a week now. And so they were able to pick up the seams and the points that break up a descent like that. And they were able to find
Hmm.
those spots to be able to navigate
Hmm.
down this thing. So
Hmm.
I'm behind the first two people who are guiding, and we are just all like locked in. Like nobody's talking. We're usually joking around, telling stories, everything, having a good time. But this, everybody was just laser focused, just eye on the prize. We knew where we had to be, but we were, not taking necessarily the straightest line, but the path of least resistance. And they were using all the things we teach them about handrails and backstops and everything that comes into off trail navigation and just finding that perfect line. And I was right behind them, making sure they were right on it and just focused and locked in, and they got it done. And it was like my proudest moment as a guide because I had just been, at
Yeah.
some point you're like, I don't know if this is sticking with you. Like, am I explaining it in a way that you understand? Like, does this make sense? And
Yeah.
of course, in the moment, they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, it makes sense. I get it. Yeah, you point here and
Yeah.
that's how you use a compass. But to see them actually do it, and for me to be so focused in and making sure that, everything's going the way we expect, was just,
Yeah.
such a cool moment.
What a great accomplishment. Very cool to kind of test a client like that. Like you're the guide, but you still have to almost let them fail, but it's still, your trainee, your baby almost, like putting the kid on the school bus for the first time kind of thing. You're like feeling so
Yeah.
proud to let him go. Like it took a lot of work to get there, but there's still that sense of unknown, that risk, that danger, anxiety. Like, is it going to work? And I don't know.
Yeah. Right.
Very interesting. Wow. So you've been guiding like about 10 years ish now? Does that check
And
out about right?
no, well, only this is my sixth season.
Okay, 6 seasons, yeah. And
Yep.
you're kind of doing the seasonal back and forth from Mount Desert Island up to Millinocket. Seems like you're living kind of a dream life, man. That's pretty amazing. I feel like we could talk for hours more. We'll have to share some more stories. I look forward to talking to you about young fatherhood and, of course, more guiding and adventures. And you kind of piqued my interest a little bit there with the financial sovereignty a little bit. Maybe we'll talk about Bitcoin some point. I don't know if you're one of those guys or not, but just kind of
No,
put a
but I'm
plug in
interested.
there. Awesome, amazing. Well, one thing I kind of like to finish up with my guests here is a bit of an open-ended question. It can go anywhere you want it to, but like, what is the next unknown for you?
I think just navigating, trying to find balance in spending time outside, but also family commitments. We have a 3-year-old daughter,
Yeah.
so you
Mm-hmm.
know, can't be gone for weeks and weeks at a time. I've got
Mm-hmm.
a lot of responsibilities now, and still caring for my father on a regular
Mm-hmm.
basis. So yeah, just trying to find that balance. It's a moving target, and it's something that I'm
Yeah.
continually working on, and it's
Yeah.
always
That's
unknown.
that's something that I'm not sure how to put a specific name to it, but what that is something that I'm trying to like learn about and gain experience from people who are kind of in the young fatherhood realm, because a lot of the feedback I get is, you're gonna lose your free time once you have kids. Like all the things you're used to, like going skiing and going rock climbing and going hiking and going canoeing and doing all these things in the outdoors that I love all the time, they're gonna kind of get snatched up. And that balance, I think, is really important, for a lot of reasons. I know for myself that if I don't get my time outside, I I kind of get upset. I
Yeah,
get physically, emotionally, spiritually drained, like down and out. I'll tend to be more cranky and more irritable, and I will be less present because I'm either, regretfully looking back on, I wish I had spent time doing that thing and I didn't get to because of
yeah,
XYZ, or again, not being in the present, looking forward to whatever the next trip is. And rather than being like, right here with my partner, or this dinner, this moment, this business, this person, this meal, whatever the present moment is, I'm instead really focused on like my next trip into the mountains. And so that balance, I think it's going to take a lot of hard work for me. I've led a pretty adventurous, fun, freewheeling life. So I appreciate that little nuance, and kind of remembering that I'll have to keep that plug. I look forward to talking to you more about it.
yeah. Well, there's the quote of, you can't pour from an empty cup. So I always try to keep that in mind
Yeah.
of, I need to do the things that fill me up to be able to then give that to others. And so that's been very
Yeah.
helpful.
I think of that in the same way, and how much of your life do you have to give up essentially? And like, what is that compromise, and like, if I want my children, say, to be as healthy as possible, I would think that I would need to be as healthy as possible, because there's going to be that kind of like trickle down essence of like what I'm exuding is going to be absorbed by the people and the children around me, kind of thing. That's an important piece that like I don't want to over focus on, but I want to keep aware of at the same time. And can't pour from an empty cup. That's absolutely true. Um, and you had shared a quote with me, and it slipped my mind a little bit, but I really liked it. Did you have a favorite piece of advice that was a quote?
Oh yeah. So the quote is just, whatever you're not changing, you're choosing. And so
Yes.
it's advice sort of disguised as a quote, where
Yeah.
the essence is really about, taking a reminder of accountability in your life,
Yeah.
and that,
Yep.
if there are things you don't like, then it's your responsibility to change them, or else that's what you're choosing, whether that's,
That's it. You made your
enjoyable or
bed.
not. Yep.
Haha. Well, on that note, Brandon, wonderful talking with you. I look forward to the next. We'll absolutely be in touch. And thanks for joining me.
Thank you. This is great.
Cheers. Take care.
Thanks.